There comes a moment in every human heart when noise becomes the enemy and silence becomes the truth teller. When you love someone who fears closeness, someone who carries old wounds like armor, you must understand something profound. Love is not always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet that awakens the soul. See, when you step back, not in anger, not in punishment, but in power, you create a space they've never experienced before, a space where they can finally feel their own emotions, not the pressure of yours. People with avoidant tendencies don't fear you. They fear losing themselves. But when you offer silence rooted in self-respect, you show them something transformational. You're not there to consume them. You're there to inspire them. And here's the breakthrough. When you stop chasing, they stop running. When you stop pushing, they stop resisting. When you stop filling every gap with words, they finally feel the weight of your absence and the truth of their feelings. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is presence without force. It is love without attachment. It is desire without desperation. Your quiet strength becomes a mirror they can't escape. It reflects what they truly want but were too afraid to admit. It reveals the difference between a connection that drains them and a connection that grows them. And suddenly, they begin to feel something they've never felt before. Safety and love. See, love isn't about trying to fix someone. You're not here to rescue anyone from their own shadows. You're here to stand in your light so powerfully that they remember they have one of their own. When you choose silence not as a weapon but as wisdom, their heart begins to awaken. They start thinking about you, replaying moments, missing your presence, your energy, your grounding. Because the truth is, love is not born from pressure. It is born from freedom. And freedom is exactly what your silence gives them. Freedom to feel, freedom to choose, freedom to love you on their own terms, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire. And that kind of love, that is real love. That is awakened love. That is love that grows deeper, stronger, more authentic than anything force could ever create. So if you're in the quiet season, honor it. Use it. Let it strengthen you. Let it remind you of your worth. Because when your silence is rooted in self-love, it becomes a force more powerful than any speech, any argument, any plea. It becomes the catalyst that transforms not just them, but you. Stand in your power. Stand in your truth. Stand in the silence that speaks louder than words. And watch how love, true love, begins to rise. Silence creates a space that most avoidant individuals have never truly experienced. An emotional environment free from pressure, expectation, or the fear of being consumed. For someone with avoidant tendencies, closeness often feels like a threat to their autonomy. They have spent years, sometimes decades, protecting themselves from vulnerability because vulnerability once felt unsafe, overwhelming, or even painful. But when you step back and offer silence, not the cold silence of punishment, but the calm silence of inner strength, you provide a rare opportunity for them to sit with feelings they normally run from. Avoidants are masters at distraction. They distract themselves with tasks, independence, work, hobbies, anything that keeps emotional closeness at arm's length. But when the noise stops, when you stop filling every moment with attempts to connect, reassure, or pursue, their internal world becomes louder. This is the paradox. Your silence amplifies their truth. Suddenly, the feelings they've been suppressing begin to surface. They find themselves wondering why they miss your presence, why your energy keeps coming to mind, why the absence of your voice feels heavier than they expected. Silence pushes them into self-reflection, not because you force them to think, but because you stop chasing them away from it. When you pull back, they no longer need to protect themselves from emotional overwhelm. The intensity that once triggered their defenses dissipates. This creates internal space, a sense of safety where their heart can breathe without fear of being cornered. In this quiet, they can finally observe their reactions rather than run from them. They begin to understand what they feel for you, without the noise of expectation clouding everything. In that space, they remember the moments of connection, the comfort of your presence, the security of your energy, and the natural bond that exists between you. They start to question why they pulled away in the first place. Avoidants don't typically reflect during conflict or emotional intensity. Those situations activate their instinct to detach. But your silence removes any perceived threat, allowing their body and nervous system to settle. When they're no longer defending themselves, their deeper emotions have room to rise to the surface. What makes silence so powerful is that it invites them to do the one thing they've avoided their entire life: feel. Genuine self-reflection can only happen when the emotional pressure is low. Without you speaking, explaining, persuading, or trying to break through their walls, the only voice they hear is their own. And that voice begins to ask deeper questions. Why do I feel this pull toward them? Why do I keep thinking about them? Why does their distance bother me more than I thought it would? Why does their absence feel heavier than their presence ever did? Through silence, you unintentionally teach them that love doesn't have to be overwhelming. You show that connection can be spacious, not suffocating. They start to see that you're not asking for anything they're not ready to give, and this changes everything. Because avoidants fall in love not when they feel chased, but when they feel safe enough to approach on their own terms. Your silence also becomes a reflection of self-respect and avoidance, despite what many believe. Deeply admire emotional strength. It reassures them that you are not dependent on them for your happiness. This calms their fears. It reassures them that loving you won't cost them their freedom. It communicates that you value yourself enough not to beg for love. In that energy, they finally feel free to explore their own feelings without pressure. Silence becomes the very thing that awakens emotional truth within them. It becomes the mirror that reveals what their heart has been hiding. It becomes the safe haven where they can question their patterns and begin to connect from a place of choice rather than fear. And that internal shift, that moment of self-awareness, is where real love begins to take root. Your presence is felt more intensely in your absence because absence removes distraction. It strips everything down to what is genuine, what is missing, and what truly matters. When someone has avoidant tendencies, they often take emotional connections for granted, not because they don't value them, but because connection itself triggers old fears. They become so focused on protecting their independence that they fail to notice the steady emotional nourishment you give simply by being in their life. Your energy, your warmth, your support, and even your quiet companionship become background music, so familiar they stop hearing it. But the moment that music stops, the silence becomes powerful. It becomes undeniable. This is the paradox of the avoidant heart. They often only understand the depth of connection when they're no longer receiving it. Your absence disrupts their emotional autopilot. It pulls them into a new level of awareness, one they didn't consciously choose but can't escape. Suddenly, what was once taken for granted becomes something they long for. They begin to recognize the value of your presence in a way they never could when you were always available, always giving, always offering your emotional energy without boundaries. Absence magnifies your impact. When you are consistently present, even with the best intentions, they may perceive your energy as pressure. Avoidants unconsciously associate closeness with losing themselves. So when you step back, the immediate pressure they felt dissipates. And in that sudden release, something unexpected happens. They feel the contrast. They feel the difference between having you near and having you gone. And for the first time, they may realize just how profoundly you influence their emotional world. Your absence becomes a spotlight. It highlights the peace they felt around you, the mental clarity you brought, the sense of grounding your presence provided. When you're gone, they begin to recognize the small things they dismissed before, your tone, your presence, your laughter, the way you made them feel comfortable in their own skin. These aren't things avoidants actively reflect on when they're close to someone. Their instinct is to maintain internal distance, but absence removes the emotional noise. It gives them no choice but to confront the reality of how much you matter to them. An avoidant isn't moved by words or emotional intensity. They are moved by contrast. They are moved by the shift from having to not having. This shift awakens desire, curiosity, and the subtle ache of longing. These feelings are often unfamiliar to them because avoidants numb themselves from emotional needs as a survival mechanism. But your absence stirs emotions they've suppressed. Feelings of connection, appreciation, desire, and even vulnerability. When your energy is no longer readily accessible, they begin to question their own assumptions. They ask themselves why they feel unsettled, why they keep thinking about you, why they miss something they once tried to downplay. They notice the subtle spaces in their day where your presence once lived. They feel the emptiness in conversations that used to be filled with your voice. The bond they once kept at arm's length becomes something they slowly reach toward. Absence doesn't create love out of thin air. It reveals what was already there. It removes the protective layers the avoidant holds onto and exposes the truth beneath them. It helps them realize that your presence wasn't just another part of their routine. It was a source of emotional grounding they didn't know they needed. They begin to see that life feels different without you, less vibrant, less balanced, less meaningful, and when an avoidant realizes that your absence leaves a void, they begin to understand love in a way they never have before. The connection becomes something they crave, not out of dependency, but out of genuine emotional recognition. Your absence teaches them that losing you is far more terrifying than the closeness they once resisted. Emotional safety is one of the most essential ingredients for love, especially for someone with avoidant attachment tendencies. These individuals have often been shaped by past experiences where emotional closeness felt overwhelming, unpredictable, or even dangerous. Their instinct is to pull away the moment they sense pressure, expectation, or any form of emotional demand. But silence, calm, grounded silence, communicates something radically different. It speaks to them in a language they can actually receive. It says, "You are free. You are not being pushed. You are not being asked to be more than you're ready to be." And in that freedom, emotional safety starts to bloom. Avoidants struggle most with the fear of losing their autonomy. They worry that being loved means giving up control or becoming responsible for someone else's emotional well-being. When someone tries to push them closer, even with kindness, the avoidant mind interprets it as pressure. But silence dismantles that illusion. It removes the sense of obligation. When you stop trying to pull them into emotional depth, they no longer feel backed into a corner. They don't feel like they are failing you. They don't feel inadequate or overwhelmed. Instead, they feel understood, even in your absence. This lack of pressure is what allows their nervous system to relax. Emotional safety isn't created through persuasion, reassurance, or constant communication. It is created through the absence of demand. Silence gives them that rare feeling of spaciousness, where they can examine their emotions without fear of being judged or rushed. When you aren't pushing them to respond, open up, or meet a need, they can finally listen to their own inner voice. And that voice begins to whisper truths they couldn't access before. How much they appreciated your presence, how natural your connection felt, how safe your energy actually was compared to what they feared. Avoidants don't fall in love because someone tries harder. They fall in love when they no longer feel the need to defend themselves. Silence becomes the environment where this defensiveness dissolves. It shows them that your love doesn't come with strings. It demonstrates that you care without trying to control. They begin to realize that being close to you doesn't cost them their independence. And this shift is profound, almost sacred, because it is the very thing they've been longing for, yet afraid to receive. Your quiet energy signals stability. It tells them you're not operating from fear or desperation. You're not attempting to manipulate their emotions. They feel safe knowing you are not going to flood them with intensity. This is where trust begins to grow. Slowly, gently, authentically. Emotional safety for them is not about dramatic expressions of love. It is about the consistent feeling that they are free to be themselves. Your silence communicates that you respect their pace, and when they feel respected, their heart becomes open in a way force could never achieve. In silence, they start to realize that you're not a threat to their emotional freedom. In fact, you're the opposite. You're the rare person who doesn't try to invade their space. That's what makes you magnetic. They begin associating you with peace rather than pressure. They begin to trust that being around you doesn't mean losing themselves. This trust becomes the foundation upon which genuine emotional connection is built. Silence also eliminates the emotional noise that normally triggers their withdrawal. Without constant communication, without emotional demands or expectations, their internal world becomes clearer. They stop reacting defensively and start feeling naturally drawn toward you. This shift from reaction to desire is everything. It's the point where they move from protecting themselves to exploring what they feel for you. And this is why silence is so powerful. It creates the exact emotional environment the avoidant needs to feel safe enough to love, not forced, not pressed, just free. In that freedom, love grows effortlessly because there is nothing resisting it anymore. Self-respect is one of the most magnetic forces in human relationships, and when it comes to someone with avoidant tendencies, it becomes even more powerful. Avoidants are highly sensitive to anything Hat feels like emotional dependency. The moment they sense that someone needs them too much, their instinct is to retreat, not because they don't care, but because dependency triggers their deepest fears. fears of being overwhelmed, controlled, or responsible for someone else's emotional state. But when your silence is rooted in self-respect rather than fear or manipulation, something inside them shifts. They begin to see you differently. They begin to feel you differently. Self-respect communicates a message more potent than any words. I value myself enough not to chase what isn't ready to meet me. This kind of energy is rare, and avoidants recognize it on a subconscious level. Your silence becomes a declaration of worth. It tells them that you are whole with or without their presence. You are not clinging to them to fill a void. You are not begging for love. This calm, grounded detachment allows them to see you as someone strong, centered, and emotionally mature, qualities that attract them far more than emotional intensity ever could. When you pull back in a self-respecting way, you interrupt the pattern they rely on, the push-pull cycle that keeps them feeling in control. Instead of chasing them, hoping for validation, or anxiously seeking reassurance, you choose yourself. You honor your own emotional boundaries. And this is where the dynamic begins to transform. Your silence isn't cold or punishing. It's simply a reflection of your inner knowing that you deserve reciprocal energy. It radiates confidence, stability, and emotional independence. Avoidants admire people who have their own life, their own goals, and their own sense of identity. They are drawn to individuals who don't crumble when the avoidant creates distance. Your self-respecting silence shows them that you are not destabilized by their behavior. You don't collapse into self-doubt. You don't implode emotionally. Instead, you stay grounded. And that groundedness becomes magnetic because it creates the one thing an avoidant craves but rarely experiences: emotional safety without pressure. Your silence amplifies your self-worth in a way that words could never accomplish. It shows them that loving you will not cost them their freedom. They begin to trust that you're not dependent on them for your happiness. This trust becomes the seed of deeper connection. It softens their defenses. It calms their nervous system and quiets the anxiety that drives their distancing behaviors. Paradoxically, the more you choose yourself, the more they begin to choose you. Self-respect also creates curiosity. Avoidants are used to people trying to win their affection, explain themselves, or chase after closeness. But when you don't do that, when your silence arises from inner strength, they begin to notice. They wonder why you're not seeking their attention. They feel the shift in your energy, and this curiosity slowly turns into attraction because you're demonstrating what they secretly admire most: emotional independence. And emotional independence is the one thing that doesn't overwhelm them, it actually draws them in. When you value yourself, your energy becomes lighter, cleaner, and more grounded. You stop trying to control the outcome, and that lack of control ironically makes them feel safer with you than with anyone else. They begin to see you as someone who respects both your boundaries and theirs, and this makes you unforgettable. Your silence becomes the quiet doorway through which they can finally see your true value. Without distraction, without pressure, without emotional noise. They begin to understand that you are not someone who needs to latch on to them, but someone who stands tall in your own worth. You are someone who chooses love without sacrificing yourself. And that level of self-respect is not just attractive. It is deeply, profoundly magnetic. Silence interrupts dysfunctional patterns because it breaks the emotional rhythm that avoidant individuals unconsciously rely on to feel safe. When someone loves an avoidant, the natural response to their distancing is often to chase, pursue, or seek reassurance. And every time you do that, you unknowingly reinforce the cycle. They pull away, you move toward them, and the dynamic becomes predictable. Predictability may seem stable, but in this case, it's destructive. It keeps them in their defensive mode and keeps you in a position of emotional overextension. Silence disrupts this entire cycle by removing your participation in it. You're no longer feeding the emotional loop that helps them maintain their distance. The dynamic begins to shift, not because they changed, but because you changed the rhythm. Avoidants often depend on the push-pull pattern to regulate their emotions. Pulling away gives them a feeling of control. It allows them to manage their fear of being overwhelmed. But when you don't chase after them, when you don't respond with anxious pursuit, you take away the emotional cue they are expecting. Suddenly, they can't complete the pattern. The dance they've always relied on ends. This interruption creates an internal awakening. They're forced to confront emotions they typically avoid. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back to them their own behavior in a way they may have never seen before. Without your pursuit, The avoidant has space to recognize their tendency to withdraw. They notice the discomfort that arises when the cycle doesn't play out the usual way. This discomfort is important. It's the beginning of awareness. And awareness is the foundation of all emotional growth. When the avoidant feels something unfamiliar, like missing you, wondering about you, or even feeling uncertain, they're experiencing the very emotions they pushed down for so long. Silence invites these emotions to the surface. The pattern interruption also gives them a chance to experience the consequences of their distancing. Not consequences as punishment, but natural consequences. Losing access to your presence, your energy, your support, and your connection. They begin to understand that withdrawal doesn't guarantee emotional safety. It can also lead to emotional loss. This realization is powerful because avoidants are typically shielded from the emotional reality of their behavior as long as someone continues to chase them. Silence reveals what happens when that chase stops. Interrupting the pattern also gives you space to stop reacting from your wounded place. When you're no longer trying to close the emotional gap, you begin to stand in your power. You reclaim your energy. You stop pouring into someone who isn't meeting you. This shift changes how they see you. Instead of viewing you as someone who continually tries to fix or maintain the connection, they start to see you as someone who values yourself enough to step back. This creates a new dynamic, one where the avoidant may feel motivated to move toward you, not because you pulled, but because the pattern no longer pushes them away. Another important effect of this interruption is that it slows down the emotional tempo. Avoidants get overwhelmed when emotions escalate too quickly. Silence brings the emotional volume down to a level they can tolerate. It gives them room to breathe. It gives them room to process. It gives them room to feel without feeling hunted. In this quieter space, understanding emerges. They can reflect instead of react. They can feel instead of flee. They can desire instead of defend. And here's the beautiful truth. When you interrupt the dysfunctional cycle, you create the possibility for a new one, a healthier one. A cycle where they naturally gravitate toward you because they feel safe. A cycle where connection is chosen, not chased. A cycle where love becomes an invitation instead of a threat. Silence isn't passive. It's powerful. It's intentional. It's the exact reset button the avoidant dynamic needs in order for real intimacy to grow. Giving an avoidant back their sense of autonomy is one of the most transformative things you can offer. Because autonomy is the core of what they fear losing in relationships. For someone with avoidant tendencies, closeness often feels like a threat to their identity. They associate emotional intimacy with having to sacrifice freedom, self-expression, or personal space. This belief is deeply rooted in past experiences where vulnerability may have been met with rejection, criticism, or emotional suffocation. But when you step back and allow silence to create spaciousness, you're doing something extraordinary. You're giving them the freedom to breathe, to think, and to choose without pressure. And this freedom is what allows genuine love to emerge. Avoidants don't want to be controlled, influenced, or expected to behave a certain way. They pull back not because they don't care, but because their internal wiring tells them that closeness equals danger. When you stop pushing for connection, when you allow the relationship to rest in stillness, they feel their autonomy returning. They no longer feel evaluated or monitored. They no longer feel responsible for managing your emotions. The air becomes lighter, the energy becomes safer, and the connection becomes something they can approach instead of escape from. Autonomy is what allows avoidants to feel emotionally safe. When they sense that their freedom is intact, their defenses soften. Their nervous system settles. They shift out of survival mode and into curiosity. Hey, begin to notice how they feel around you without the usual panic of being consumed. Your silence sends the message, I'm not here to trap you. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm not here to demand what you're not ready to give. This message, delivered without words, becomes profoundly healing to someone who has spent so much of their life guarding their independence. And here's the paradox. When avoidants feel free, they begin to approach. They move toward what feels safe. They explore what feels spacious. They gravitate toward what doesn't threaten their sense of self. So when you allow silence to give them back their autonomy, they start to feel drawn towards you rather than pushed away. They begin to think about you from a place of genuine desire instead of obligation. They choose to emotionally engage because they want to, not because they are pressured into it. This return of autonomy also allows them to hear their own emotional voice. When the relationship isn't crowded with expectations, they can explore their feelings without fear. They can admit to themselves that they miss you. They can recognize the comfort your presence brought. They can reflect on your importance in their life without feeling that recognition will cost them something. This internal permission is powerful. It's the first step toward real emotional connection. Giving an avoidance space also shows them that you honor their boundaries. You're not trying to override their pace. You're not trying to force vulnerability. You're not trying to accelerate intimacy before they're ready. This respect for their boundaries is something avoidants rarely experience because most people instinctively respond to avoidant distancing with anxiety or pursuit. But your willingness to step back communicates emotional maturity. It tells them you're confident enough to let the relationship breathe. And company infidence is deeply attractive to someone who fears being responsible for another person's emotions. Your silence becomes a sanctuary where they can experience closeness without losing themselves. It becomes a place where they can return not because they are needed, but because they are free to come and go, and that freedom makes them want to come back. Avoidants fall in love not when they are chased, but when they feel free enough to choose connection. When you give them autonomy, you give them the emotional space they need to discover their feelings on their own terms. And when they do, those feelings tend to be far more authentic, far more grounded, and far more enduring than anything forced. Because love that grows in freedom becomes love that stands the test of time. When you embody stillness, it becomes a reflection of truth that an avoidant individual can't ignore. Avoidants are often masters of emotional evasion. They protect themselves from intimacy by creating walls, distractions, and detachment. They move through life avoiding deep feelings, suppressing vulnerability, and convincing themselves that closeness is dangerous. But when you approach them with a calm, centered energy, a presence rooted in stillness rather than pursuit, you give them something profoundly unfamiliar, a mirror of their inner truth. In your stillness, they see themselves. They see what they've been avoiding. They feel what they've been ignoring. And this reflection can be transformative. Stillness is powerful because it communicates without words. You don't need to explain, plead, or argue to make your point. Your calm presence signals emotional stability, security, and self-possession. Avoidants, who are highly sensitive to pressure, immediately sense the difference between your grounded energy and the frantic chase they've grown accustomed to avoiding. Your stillness doesn't push them. It doesn't manipulate them, and it doesn't demand anything from them, but it does invite reflection. It gives them space to observe themselves, to observe their patterns, and to observe the depth of their feelings toward you. In your silence and composure, the avoidant begins to notice the contrast between the way you exist and the way they habitually react. They see that your calm doesn't depend on their validation. Your emotional balance is not shaken by their distance. They begin to realize that love doesn't have to feel suffocating, overwhelming, or threatening. They begin to understand that connection doesn't require abandoning oneself. Your stillness becomes a quiet demonstration of emotional freedom, something they often crave but rarely experience in relationships. This reflection also allows them to confront the emotions they've been denying. When someone is always chasing or pursuing them, avoidants instinctively retreat because the intensity triggers fear. But when you remain still, unhurried, and confident in your own presence, they no longer feel the need to defend against you. Instead, their defenses begin to soften. They can feel longing, curiosity, and even desire without panic. They can examine their emotional state without feeling cornered. Your stillness acts as a safe container for emotions that have long been suppressed. Stillness also communicates respect for their autonomy. Avoidants are naturally drawn to environments that allow freedom, where they are not forced to act against their instincts. When you don't overwhelm them with neediness or insistence, they recognize that you honor their pace and their space. This recognition is powerful. It subtly encourages them to take ownership of their emotions. They start to approach you because they want to, not because they are coerced. They begin to feel the depth of attraction and connection from applause. CE of choice rather than fear or habit. Another profound aspect of stillness is that it triggers self-awareness in the avoidant. They start asking themselves questions they rarely allow. Why do I feel drawn to this person? Why does their presence linger in my mind? Why does their absence feel heavier than I expected? Why do I feel unsettled when I notice their energy is no longer readily available? In confronting these questions, they are meeting their own emotional truths, the feelings they usually avoid or suppress. Your stillness creates the exact environment necessary for them to face themselves without shame or panic. Your calm energy becomes the anchor they unconsciously need. It demonstrates that love can exist without demand, without chaos, and without fear. It allows them to recognize that the connection is real, grounded, and safe. And in this space, their heart begins to awaken. They are drawn to you not because of force or intensity, but because your stillness mirrors a truth they have long denied. They are capable of feeling deeply, choosing freely, and loving authentically. In essence, your stillness is not passive, it is profoundly active. It is a form of communication that surpasses words, arguments, and persuasion. It shows them what love can be: calm, present, free, and genuine. And in this reflection, they begin to feel their own emotions in ways they never have before, laying the foundation for love that is authentic, deep, and enduring. Silence has a way of activating desire, curiosity, and emotional responsibility in an avoidant individual, in a way that words or pressure never can. Avoidants often protect themselves by keeping emotional distance, and in doing so, they numb their own awareness of feelings. They are masters at distraction, often convincing themselves that they don't need connection or that intimacy is dangerous. But when you step back, and allow silence to enter, something profound begins to happen. The absence of your constant presence or pursuit creates a vacuum that awakens the very emotions they've been avoiding. Desire begins subtly, often without them even realizing it at first. They notice the little things they miss, the way you laugh, your energy, the way your presence made situations feel lighter or safer. Because you are no longer readily available, they start to appreciate your value in a new way. The human mind is wired to notice what is missing. And when your energy is temporarily absent, it becomes more visible. Desire arises naturally, without force, because it is now born from recognition rather than expectation. Curiosity follows closely behind. Silence invites the avoidant to reflect on the connection they may have taken for granted. They begin asking themselves questions they wouldn't have considered before. Why do I feel unsettled when they are not around? Why do I find myself thinking about them? What is it about this connection that I can't ignore? Curiosity is a gentle internal nudge that leads them to explore their feelings without external pressure. It awakens introspection, helping them realize that their emotions are theirs to understand and own. Finally, silence encourages emotional responsibility. Avoidants often shy away from accountability for their feelings or behaviors, preferring to attribute discomfort to external circumstances. But when you step back, they are confronted with the consequences of their distancing. They notice how their withdrawal impacts the connection, how absence makes their feelings more prominent, and how they must choose whether to engage or continue retreating. This fosters emotional maturity, as they begin to take responsibility for their own emotions rather than relying on external stimuli to drive their attachment. Through silence, curiosity, and emotional responsibility are awakened simultaneously, creating fertile ground for an avoidant to engage authentically. They begin to approach not because they are coerced, but because they are choosing to feel, reflect, and participate in the connection on their own terms. In this way, silence becomes one of the most powerful catalysts for genuine, enduring love. Thank you for sharing your time and energy with me today. Wishing you clarity, strength, and inspiration in every step you take. Goodbye, and may your journey be filled with growth and joy.